Hey there, welcome to another week of Mind Games. We are actually in week 5. Just a reminder, this whole series has been based off of the book Bad Thoughts by Judah Smith and Les Parrott, where we've been trying to win the battle with our own thoughts. So here at Southridge Church, we just got past the end of the year, and we were doing year-end evaluations. And one of the things I asked all of my staff members to do this year was to consider doing a 360 anonymous evaluation, which, if you're not familiar with that, essentially what I asked them to do was to ask people in different areas of their life to anonymously answer a couple questions about them. That way they can find out more about themselves. Because here's the kicker. We all have blind spots. Even if we don't want to admit it, we all have blind spots. We really don't know what we don't know. And here's what I've come to realize after over a decade of leadership. Self-awareness is a superpower. And as much as self-awareness is a superpower, it's also quite rare to find. Right? My guess is, when I say self-awareness, all of us know someone or have met someone that we go, oh, they really lack self-awareness. I'll never forget, I remember there was a time where someone at our church wanted to go on a trip. They wanted a ministry trip to go, and they asked if the church would help promote it, and we're like, yeah, we'll see what we can do, and no one signed up for the trip. No one signed up for the trip. And I remember this individual being very upset with the church. They were going, well, it's because you didn't promote it good enough. And at this point in my life and in my leadership, I just didn't have the heart to tell the person. No, the reason no one signed up is no one wants to go to a trip and stay in a room and drive across 5 states with you because you're kind of a difficult person. Right? They just lacked self-awareness. They thought it was the church's fault for not promoting the event, but the truth was they just didn't have enough self-awareness to know that maybe the problem was them. And that's why I say self-awareness is a superpower, which is why we need to be very, very careful to make sure that we get the information that we need to know about ourselves. Because left to ourselves, we're not the best narrators of our story. That's why Jeremiah chapter 17, verse 9, it says, the human heart is the most deceitful thing, deceitful of all things, and desperately wicked. Who really knows how bad it really is? What's Jeremiah here saying? It's like, listen, sometimes we can be led astray to think things are really better than they really are. And we can't always just trust our inclination or whatever comes most natural to our mind. Sometimes we need to challenge that because we may not be the most reliable narrators of our own story. People who lack self-awareness, if you've met one, and we all have, you'll know this to be true. They tend to complain more than most, and they struggle to have realistic expectations. Over all this time of church ministry, I've encountered quite a few people that have had a hard time finding one of our small groups to be a part of. Here at our church, depending on the session, we will have 10, 15, 20, upwards of 30 different small groups, and somehow there's a problem with all of them. And it's in those moments I want to go, have you thought just for a moment that maybe there's not a problem with all of our groups, that maybe there's something else going on? Maybe it's not someone else's fault. Maybe there's something about yourself that you don't know that really needs to be dealt with. See, the problem with a lack of self-awareness is that you might go your whole life and never realize that you just might be the problem. Now, when I asked earlier if you knew someone that lacks self-awareness, my guess is you could make a list. But I bet one person that lacks self-awareness would be left off of that list. And that would be you. And that would be me. Because we don't like to think that we lack self-awareness. Because self-awareness is quite tricky. Here's a couple reasons why. First and foremost, why self-awareness can be so tricky is that we live in a culture right now that has moved the pendulum on the topic of self-awareness so far to the extreme that we now live in a culture where many would affirm that the most important thing about you is actually how you see yourself. And not just how you view yourself, but that it's incumbent upon you to be whole and healthy, that you must not just see yourself accurately, but you actually need to see yourself as far greater than you really are. This is why Diane Mastro Marino wrote a book called she wrote a book called The Girl's Guide to Loving Yourself. It's a book all about falling in love with the one person who matters most, you. That's why she says in that book, loving yourself means knowing how great you are and not letting any person, any place, or anything ever get in the way of that. See, in our culture, self-esteem has often been hailed as a kind of universal cure-all, and it was once described by an author as the nation's very own wonder drug. Now listen, I'm not trying to move the pendulum all the way to the other end. Remember, just last week in our series, we talked about how we need to diminish self-doubt and increase self-confidence. But here's where self-awareness is the key. A healthy self-image is essential to our dignity. Self-acceptance enables us to love other people with the best of motives. So Romans chapter 12, verse 3, the Apostle Paul says, because of this privilege and authority God has given me, I give each of you this warning. Don't think of yourselves better than you really are. Be honest in your evaluation of yourselves, measuring ourselves by the faith God has given us. Notice in this passage, Paul doesn't say to think of yourself poorly. I'm not trying to take the pendulum all the way to the other end. I'm not saying think of yourself poorly. I'm not saying degrade yourself. What Paul is directing us to do is to see ourselves accurately, to see ourselves as God sees us. However, in our current culture, self-esteem is a lot of times mistaken for vanity, unhealthy pride, a distortion of reality, and a sense of entitlement that's not too far from narcissism. For instance, think of the phenomena of social media. Why do we think that anyone cares what we have to say constantly? How self-obsessed do we have to be to think that we actually need our own channel that's all me? In everything I think, in everything that, all of my opinions, and all the ways that I see situations. Truthfully, only someone with an inflated sense of self would delude themselves into thinking that everyone cares that much about their own opinions. Why, you might ask, do we live in the most offended society that has ever existed? Well, why do we live in such a divisive and hostile culture? It's all tied to this, because we have been so discipled to see ourselves as special and superior that now we have to fight against anything that opposes what we stand for. Because there's no way, as special as we are, that we could possibly be wrong. Nothing that we thought or believed could actually be off base. In this self-obsessed culture, we can't admit weakness. We can't say that we're wrong. Admitting a weakness would be to betray the culture of self-admiration. The problem here, or really the answer to all of this, is not to swing the pendulum back to talk about how horrible and awful and nasty we are and tear ourselves down. That will not do the job either. Remember last week, the key is going to be seeing ourselves clearly and not being deceived by our own flawed thinking. What we're really talking about this week is humility. Humility. But as far as the Bible is concerned, humility is concerned. It doesn't require you to degrade yourself or believe things that aren't true. As far as the Bible is concerned, true humility is simply agreeing with God about what is true about you. It's just agreeing with God. It's not an inflated sense of self, and it's not a degradation of self. It's seeing yourself accurately. So if we're talking about humility, the opposite of that being pride, let's talk about that. Because it's a difficult topic to talk about, because many of us have been talked to about the dangers of pride. And so we have somewhat written off pride altogether. And a lot of us, we fall into what's called false humility and self-deprecation. But we need to first start with the fact that not all pride is actually bad. There is a healthy pride, which is the kind of pride that acknowledges hard work, values, and accomplishes, ours as well as others. Unhealthy pride, though, is the type of pride that swells your ego, and it reeks of arrogance. It has been said that humility is a strange thing because the moment you believe you have it is the moment that you have actually lost it. Striving for humility can come with a hidden sense of superiority over those that we deem less humble. So humility is a very tricky thing to grasp a hold of. We've even coined a term in our current culture for this. We call it a humble brag, right? If it's something that when you're trying to seem humble, but you're really just bragging, we call it a humble brag. I'll never forget, I saw a social media post one time about someone that was giving away their clothes to charity, and the post went something like this. It felt so good to give away all of my old clothes to the Salvation Army. And it was just real humble brag. And then I went and read the comments, and it was, oh, wow, what a nice young man you are. What a great, and I was thinking, well, how messed up are we as a society that when we see something like that, we don't realize it for what it really is. And it's like we're patting ourselves on the back because we're giving away our junk to the less fortunate. That's a humble brag. It might be a newer term, but even Jesus dealt with humble brags in his day. He tells a story in Luke chapter 18. It says this, that then Jesus told this story to some who had great confidence in their own righteousness and scorned everyone else. He's saying, Jesus told this story to the people that were filled with pride. 2 men went to the temple to pray. One was a Pharisee and the other was a despised tax collector. The Pharisee stood by himself and prayed this prayer: I thank you, God, that I'm not like other people, cheaters, sinners, adulterers, and I'm certainly not like that tax collector. I fast twice a week, and I give 1/10 of my income. But the tax collector stood at a distance and dared not even lift his eyes to heaven as he prayed. Instead, he beat his chest in sorrow, saying, "Oh God, be merciful to me, for I'm a sinner." I tell you, this sinner, not the Pharisee, returned home justified before God. For those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. Did you hear the Pharisees' humble brag? Oh, I'm so glad I'm not like that person because I do this and I do this. And it's not humility. It's actually a very unhealthy pride. Unhealthy pride is a dangerous thing for a Christian because we secretly train ourselves not to rely on God. We think we're so talented, we're so smart, we're so resourceful. Certainly someone as amazingly special as I am will just figure it out whether God's with us or not. So it can be very damaging. This sort of pride can be very damaging for our faith. It will also cause us to minimize our own sins and mistakes, since we will believe that our motives are better. Even if our actions aren't better, we'll believe that our motives are better than they really are, and we'll give ourselves a pass for our shortcomings rather than actually dealing with things in our life that need to be dealt with. So what we need is a healthy humility. Did you know the word humility gets its origins from the Latin humilis? It literally means from the earth. Literally, humility steps off its proverbial high horse to be common and lowly, or from the earth. And that term, high horse, that we use all the time when we're talking about pride, that actually dates back to medieval times when it was used to literally reference men who could afford to own and ride great horses. See, the horse in those times symbolized power, pompousness, and prestige. Genuine humility does not lead us to inferiority. Genuine humility is rooted in self-respect and a clear-eyed view of both strengths and weaknesses. Like we have said, it's simply agreeing with God about what is true. See, when praised, those with true humility, they don't downplay their efforts with artificial modesty. So when someone gives you a compliment because you are actually gifted in a specific way, because God has gifted you in that way, it's false humility to make light of it, to not accept the compliment. False humility, on the other hand, disguises itself in self-deprecation. It rejects personal gifts and achievements with dismissive remarks. Rather than agreeing, maybe God has actually blessed you in a very specific way. Maybe you can teach. Maybe you can lead. Maybe you're a good singer or a good musician. Maybe you're a good friend or a good listener. It's not prideful to say, yes, this is how God has blessed me. This is how God has gifted me. You don't have to dismiss those comments. You don't have to push them away. That's false humility. You can take what people say, compliments, and if it's because of how God made you, it's not false humility, it's true humility. To say thank you. Praise God for that, because this is how God made me. I am good at that. I am strong in that area. Not because I'm so special, but because God made me like this. Now, false humility, on the other hand, self-deprecating. Unhealthy pride takes the position of superiority, but false humility takes inferiority to the max. We don't need those two extremes. See, a truly humble heart recognizes both abilities and inadequacies. And where does all this self-admiration and unhealthy pride ultimately lead us to? So if we persist in this unhealthy pride, where do we end up? This is going to be a very familiar term for the day and age that we're living. Where all of this ends up is entitlement. Entitlement. The idea that the world owes me better. Why? Because I'm better than what I'm getting. All of this unhealthy pride, all of this lack of self-awareness leads us to entitlement and thinking we deserve better. See, if I'm so special, if everything I believe is so right, if there's nothing wrong with me, then the world just shouldn't be so hard, should it? People should treat me special. People should treat me special. I know this as a pastor and as a leader, this can be a real struggle for us in our positions. I'll show you one of the ways that this really rears its ugly head in my life is as I'm leading or if I'm communicating something to a group of people, and if I feel like I've been super clear about it, whenever someone asks me a question, it feels like it's undermining me. It feels like someone is questioning my ability to properly communicate ideas to them. It's very, very difficult. And why is that? Because we want to think of ourselves better than what we really are. But here's what we have to come to terms with, folks. The world doesn't owe us anything. The world doesn't owe us anything. Listen, if you're a Christian, God doesn't owe you anything either. We've already been blessed far more than what we deserve. And here's the amazing thing about God is even though we don't deserve better than what we're getting, in many instances in God's kindness, God gives us far more than we could ever begin to earn or deserve. So, entitlement. What's it really sound like in our lives? It sounds like this. Maybe these will sound familiar to you. Maybe not things that you would say out loud, but maybe things that we have said quietly or thought in the back of our minds. Sounds like this. My needs must be met all the time. Or this. Life should be easy and fair. Perhaps this. I deserve special attention. I must get exactly what I want to be happy, because if I'm not happy, no one else is going to be happy. Or maybe you'll notice this attitude, especially when you go to work. Everyone else is so incompetent, right? You're the only good employee at your job. Or you think this, I have a right to complain, Right? How many of you have gone to a restaurant? I have the right to complain. The customer is always right. Or maybe you've thought this: others should make things right for me. Now, this one hit a little bit too close to home because we have a running joke in our family that I am that person at a restaurant or when I'm going out. If I'm spending my own money, I want things to be a certain way. I want them to be at a certain level, and my wife gets very frustrated with me because I had this idea that if things don't go the way that I think that they should go, I feel like those people that I'm paying for this service owe me this one word, and we joke about it all the time, but it's a very real issue in my heart that I'm wrestling with. This one word: compensation. I think that they owe me something. I think that they should make things right. I think they should apologize to me. Where does that come from? Entitlement. Entitlement. Here's where this whole thing gets very tricky. We talked in week 1 how a lot of times our unhealthy talk is actually on autopilot. So we might not even consciously recall choosing to think this way. It's sort of auto triggers. Like, you ever notice how whenever you think something about somebody else that they've done something they didn't meet your expectations, automatically you put in bad motive without assessing the whole situation? The danger in this sort of thinking is certain to create a constant vulnerability to unmet expectations that lead to volatile emotions. Those are two things that you really need to pay attention to. If you're wondering, if this message is for me, if this is one of my struggles, do you have quite volatile emotions? And do you very regularly have expectations that go unmet? It may be that you have too high of expectations because you feel like you deserve better. It may be coming from a sense of entitlement. Maybe you're not just a perfectionist, or maybe you're not just a neat freak, or maybe you're not just type A. Maybe you're entitled. It's something that you're going to have to wrestle with. So then, if this lack of self-awareness has left many of us in a sense of, or a state of unhealthy pride, which ultimately leads us to entitlement, how do we guard against this? How do we fight back against these autopilot thoughts that lead us to a sense of entitlement? What is our way out? Now, when I read this, I was blown away. Are you ready for the antidote? Kindness is the antidote for pride and entitlement. How are you going to get out of entitlement mode? Through acts of service, through being kind to other people. Kind acts embody an uncalculating attitude that desires neither monetary payment nor human applause. So kindness is when you aren't getting anything out of it. Some call it benevolence, goodwill, generativity, or altruism. But kindness comes from the Saxon word meaning family or kin, which makes sense, right? Kindness is simply treating people like they're family. And I guess I should preface when I say that, I'm talking about the family that you like and that you care for. Kindness is treating them like the family that you love and cherish and would do anything for. See, kindness sets aside fears of being exploited. How many of us, we haven't done something kind for someone else because we thought that they would take what we gave them and do something that we didn't approve of with it? Or we won't help somebody out that's in need because we don't want to end up being taken advantage of. See, kindness sets aside that fear and goes, if they take advantage of me, they take advantage of me, but I'm going to do what I feel in my heart is right. Because it relinquishes self-focus. Kindness causes us to pause from our own self-centered interest in order to augment somebody else's pursuits. So kindness is the surest path away from a sense of entitlement. The best way to cheer yourself up is to try to cheer someone else up, Mark Twain said. The only ones among you who will be really happy are those who have sought and found how to serve, is what Albert Schweitzer told us. Countless studies have shown time and time again that being generous and considerate actually makes people happy. Now, here's the tricky thing about this topic. It would seem like a humble brag to add a personal illustration here of my own kindness. So I think for the case of our study, I'll skip illustrating that. But think of it in this term. You ever do something around the house that you know benefits the rest of your family? Like do laundry at your house or do the dishes, and you just, at the end of it, you get this little sense of, well, now my family's going to have what they need. Whether it's a clean spoon to have their morning cereal or whether it's clothes for work that week. You get a little bit of that sense of like, I did something that's helping someone else and it feels good at the end of it. So we're called time and time again in the Bible towards acts of kindness and charity. I wonder if it's because God knew how interconnected those things would be to fighting against this sense of pride and entitlement. That's probably why the Bible has been so far ahead in so many ways on this. Philippians chapter 2 verse 3 says this, don't be selfish, don't try to impress others, instead be humble, thinking of yourselves as better, or thinking of others as better than yourselves. It may not seem like it, because we've all been around preachers that have tried to convince us that Christianity is supposed to make you miserable. But that's not the case. Did you know that God actually designed you to have a driving desire for happiness and fulfillment? God wants you to be happy. But too often, the mistake we make is that what we think will make us happy is not going to work. What we think brings abiding joy, it just won't. We search in all the wrong places. And God has been ahead of this the whole time. Go and act selflessly. Do acts of kindness if you want to find true happiness. We think putting ourselves first is going to be the key to happiness. And God says, no, you're getting it backwards. Often the greatest hindrance to true enjoyment is our willingness to settle for pitiful pleasures of thinking the world owes us happiness, that people around us need to make us happy, that power and pleasure are true sources of joy. In short, we think looking out for our own needs and building up our own importance is the road to joy. It's not. One of the most basic psychological laws that we have come to know throughout the years is this: when you help others, you immediately receive a payoff yourself. This is why Ralph Waldo Emerson said, we cannot sincerely help another without helping yourself. There's something inherent in it for you. So what's the problem then? Well, here's the problem. If we're all decent, church-going, moral people, how did so many of us end up so entitled and filled with pride when we know how devastating they can be? Because I imagine most of us, if we self-assessed right now, would find ourselves to be kind, good-hearted people. I think why this is such a problem is that we haven't been honest enough in our self-assessment. I think sometimes, and remember, we said self-awareness is a superpower, but sometimes it's very rare. We live in a culture where we're called to focus, where to focus on your weakness or even admit it means that you have a problem. But admitting that we need help, recognizing that we can't do it all on our own, and accepting that we have inner work to do, these are the very things that actually open the door to resilience. So what am I actually saying? We need to be honest about ourselves. If you want to get past this entitlement issue, you're going to have to be honest. And even though we want to believe the best, whether we want to admit it or not, most of us are entitled because we're all about self-interest. We get it backwards. We think we'll start taking care of others. We'll be generous. We will serve. We'll put others first once we have found our own happiness. After we're content and taken care of, then I can help others. You think maybe once I am successful and happy, then I will look out for the sake of others. You're getting it backwards. The key to true happiness is to put others first. Kindness. Kind of incredible that the Bible has been out in front of this for so long. And now modern studies all confirm it. Proverbs 11:25 tells us that the generous will prosper. Those who refresh others will themselves be refreshed. Did you know that no one grows into a well-rounded, fulfilled person without learning to love others while expecting nothing in return? This single skill is the foundation of a meaningful life. Without generosity and a spirit of kindness, a person remains stuck in an outdated illusion that life is about entitlement rather than contribution. So do you want to be a well-rounded person? You want to be happy? You want to be fulfilled? It happens when you put others first, when you are kind, when you make life about more than yourself. When I thought about this lesson and we were going to be learning about pride and entitlement, my hope was that the action step would be something much more simpler than kindness. It would have been way easier if it was just a prayer that we could pray or a ritual that we could follow. But the truth is, there's no substitution for doing good to others. There's just no substitution for it. So here's my challenge to you this week. Don't just try to feel kinder. Don't just try to do something kinder. Pick one thing, one kind thing, and do it. But here's the kicker. Don't let anyone else know about it. Do something kind that no one else knows about and see what it does to your heart.